Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. In case you're new here, my name is Laura and I'm a PhD student of Comparative Literature in Germany. And today I invite you to look back on 2024 with me, which was the year in which this man was celebrated a lot. Franz Kafka, whose death marked a 100-year anniversary this year, as he died in 1924. What do you connect with him? What do you associate with his writing? Do you think about the absurdities of life, the existential dread that many protagonists have to face, or the endless nightmarish bureaucracies, his bad relationship with his father, or the depressive phases that overshadowed parts of his life? Whatever you might connect with him, I am here to tell you there's another side to look at things. What if I told you that Kafka is actually really funny at times and that the slight humor in his stories is oftentimes overlooked? Today I invite you to uncover the hidden humor in Kafka's texts with me, by example of two stories that you might or might not know. But let us first start by looking back on the Kafka year and what happened in 2024. So the year 2024 has been a major celebration for Kafka enthusiasts worldwide. As the year marked the centennial of his death, Kafka has been celebrated everywhere with new exhibitions and lots of new publications and discussions. I want to draw your attention to two notable film adaptations that delved into the life of Franz Kafka as a person and his relationship to other people, especially to his friend Max Brod, his lovers and his father. The first of them is Kafka, a TV miniseries from Germany and Austria, which delves into one of these relationships in each episode. So at the center of each episode is another person from Kafka's life and his relationship to Kafka. For example, his best friend Max Brod, his father, his girlfriends Felix Bauer, Melina Jasenska and Dora Diamant and others. And this mini-series draws a quite interesting look upon Kafka's life, his character and his relationships. And I loved it because it depicts Kafka in a very different light than we usually see him. Because actually he is depicted a lot happier and more humorous than we oftentimes get or got shown before. And the other film has been highly praised. I haven't seen it myself yet, but if you're interested, I want to mention that too, because it has gotten a lot of attention. It is called Die Herrlichkeit des Lebens, or in English, The Glory of Life, and was published in March 2024. And it is a drama film that centers on the final year of Kafka's life, in which he met his last girlfriend, Dora Diamant, on the Baltic Sea coast in 1923. And it just shows the love they shared and the happenings of his last year of living. Both productions have received a lot of praise for shedding light on Kafka's intimate relationships and his character, and also his personal struggles that also influenced his writing. And all in all, I think this year kind of shown us that there's such a huge versatility to Kafka. He's more than just this depressed author who has been writing about bureaucracy and the absurdity of life, although this makes a big part. But he has been writing about so many more topics and looking at life from so many different perspectives, and also experienced life in such a huge variety that today I want to take this time to look upon the humor in his writing. But first we have to ask ourselves two questions. The first is, who was Franz Kafka? For those of you who don't know much about him. The second is, what is humor and how can it be defined? Kafka was born in Prague in 1883 into a middle-class Jewish family. He worked most of his adult life as a clerk at an insurance company and was writing all his stories in his free time, mostly at night or on the weekends. Although Kafka published only a few works during his lifetime, he left behind an extensive body of unfinished manuscripts and was famously asking his best friend Max Brod to destroy them after his death. But luckily, Brod didn't comply and published the work. And Kafka's works went on to shape a very big important part of modern literature. So his writing is known for its surreal worlds, impenetrable bureaucracies, and existential despair. But then there's also his humorous side, a side that you easily overlook if you don't pay close attention. And that's what brings us to the next section. What is humor? Humor is a literary device or a mode of expression designed to provoke amusement, irony, or laughter. It often arises from incongruity, situations or ideas that don't quite fit together, and highlights absurdity, surprise, or human folly. But humor is not always straightforward. It can be light-hearted or dark, joyful or biting. Kafka's humor belongs to a special category as it is subtle. It is absurd and often unsettling, making you laugh and squirm at the same time, as you will see in a second. His humor is unique because it lies in his ability to blend the ordinary with the bizarre. His stories often take very mundane situations like relationships, work, or daily routines and twist them into absurd, almost surreal predicaments. So Kafka's humor is in 3 points. First, deadpan. It is delivered with such a straight face that you might miss the joke entirely if you don't pay close attention. Secondly, it is absurd as situations are so illogical or extreme that they become funny through their strangeness and you don't even believe them at first. And thirdly, his humor is also a little bit uncomfortable because you laugh, but you're also left questioning the deeper implications and the deeper meaning of life that is revealed through his stories. So this mix creates a dry and almost tragic comical humor that reflects the complexities of life and especially the frustrations of our modern everyday life that most of us know, and that is also part of why Kafka can feel relatable in parts to many people, I think. Now we want to look at 2 short works where Kafka's humor shines through in these mundane everyday situations. One of them is the story The Neighbour and the other is the story The Cares of a Family Man. In German they are called Der Nachbar and Die Sorge des Hausvaters. I will read both of them shortly in German and in English and also look at the humor in the stories after each reading. So now I will read the first of the 2 stories to you. I will also link the German original version below, but it would take too much time to read both in German and English, therefore I decided to read the English translation I made myself. The story was written in 1917 and published in 1931 in Berlin, and it goes like this. My business rests entirely on my shoulders. 2 young women with typewriters and account books in the front room, my office with a desk, cash box, consulting table, club chairs and telephone. That is my entire work apparatus. So easy to oversee, so simple to manage. I am very young and business rolls along in front of me. I do not complain, I do not complain. Since New Year, a young man has rented the small vacant neighboring apartment that I had unfortunately hesitated to rent for too long. A room with an antechamber and additionally a kitchen. I certainly could have used the room and the antechamber. My 2 young women sometimes feel overworked. But what use would the kitchen have been to me? This petty concern is the reason I let the apartment slip away. Now this young man sits there. His name is Harras. What exactly he does there I do not know. On his door it says Harras, office. I have made inquiries and was told that it is a business similar to mine. One could not precisely warn against extending credit to him, for he is, after all, a young aspiring man whose enterprise may have a future. Yet one could not precisely recommend it either, for at present, by all appearances, there is no capital. The usual information one gives when one knows nothing. Sometimes I encounter Harras on the staircase. He must always be in an extraordinary hurry, as he practically slips past me. I have not yet really seen him. He already has the office key prepared in his hand. In a flash he has the door open. Like the tail of a rat, he has slipped inside, and I stand again in front of the sign, Harras' office, which I have read far more often than it deserves. The miserable thin walls which betray the honest working man but conceal the dishonest one. My telephone is mounted on the wall that separates me from my neighbor. But I mention this merely as a particularly ironic fact. Even if it were hung on the opposite wall, everything would still be audible in the neighboring apartment. I have trained myself not to mention the names of clients over the phone, but of course it does not take much cunning to deduce names from the characteristics, though unavoidable, turns of conversation. Sometimes, driven to restlessness, I dance on tiptoe around the apparatus, the receiver at my ear, yet still cannot prevent secrets from being revealed. Naturally, this mistake makes my business decisions uncertain, my voice shaky. What does Harras do while I am on the phone? If I wanted to exaggerate greatly, but one often must, to gain clarity, I could say Harras does not need a telephone, he uses mine. He has pushed his sofa up against the wall and listens. I, on the other hand, must, when the phone rings, run to the telephone, take the customer's wishes, make grave decisions, execute large-scale persuasions, but above all, during the whole process, involuntarily give Harras a report through the wall. Perhaps he does not even wait for the end of the conversation, but rises at the point that has sufficiently informed him of the case, hurries through the city as is his habit, and, before I have hung up the receiver, is already working to undercut me. So what do we see here? We see that the story revolves around the narrator, who is a young businessman whose office consists of a simple setup. He takes pride in a streamlined and manageable business, but his life takes a turn when a young man called Harras rents the neighboring apartment. But you see that the narrator grows suspicious of Harras, whom he doesn't really know, he has never really met, and he grows so much more suspicious that he spins these ideas in his head that Harras could undercut him and to steal his clients and work against him all the time. And he pictures these scenes so vividly in his head that he becomes haunted by them even. And as you see, the narrator exaggerates the whole situation to really comical proportions and envisions Harras already rushing through the streets and always hurrying inside his office like with the tail of a rat behind him, as he seems not to wish to meet the narrator, but this is all just in his head. So how is the humor in this story characterized? It is characterized by the paranoia of the narrator, the absurdity of the whole situation, and the irony that Kafka uses. And it is delivered in this signature deadpan style that is very famous for Kafka. So the first aspect, the paranoia, is that the narrator's exaggerated fear that Harras is spying on him through the walls borders on the ridiculous, because he does not have any reason to suspect that Harras really does that. He imagines Harras not only eavesdropping on his conversations, but immediately acting on the information with superhuman speed and stealing his clients. There's the comical hyperbole as the narrator claims that Harris doesn't need his own phone because he can simply use his own through the wall. And he pictures Harris springing into action like the tail of a rat, an image that combines humor and grotesqueness as you would expect more from Gothic literature. Then the effect of that is the absurdity of the suspicion that makes the narrator seem almost delusional, yet Kafka's tone invites the reader to consider whether the paranoia might have a grain of truth, because we never really get a glimpse into Harris' office. We don't really know what's going on inside, what he does for his business outside in town. There's also the irony of the thin walls, as these thin walls separate the narrator and Harris and serve as a darkly comical symbol of the fragility of the narrator's privacy. As Kafka points out, the walls betray the honest working man but conceal the dishonest one. The line is funny because the narrator assumes he is the honest one and Harris is dishonest without any real evidence. And also, in the same time, he tells himself lies about Harris that he does not know whether they even have a grain of truth. His moral superiority, or his assumed moral superiority, is undercut by his obsession with his assumed competitor Harris. And this irony highlights the narrator's insecurity and the absurd length he goes to protect what little privacy he has, even though his imagined opponent might not care as much as he even fears. The deadpan delivery and the mundane details that Kafka mentions here also play a part in this whole humorous depiction, as Kafka presents the narrator's anxieties with a completely serious, matter-of-fact tone, which amplifies the absurdity, as the narrators focus on trivial details such as the kitchen in the neighboring apartment or the telephone, Harris' hurried movements or his own decision to stop naming clients on the phone, turns what should be mundane into a source of his existential dread, because he really fears what might happen to him if this situation goes on. And the narrator notices little details of his encounters with Harris or what he learns about him with very pedantic precision and detail. The effect of this is that by presenting these absurd observations with total sincerity, Kafka creates a darkly comic tension, as the reader recognizes the humor in the narrator's exaggerated concerns, even as he remains oblivious to it. Then also in this section, the mundane collides with the paranoia, as mundane reality and the reality of the narrator and his thoughts, they were getting juxtaposed, as the telephone, which is just a normal office tool and also described as such in the beginning of the story, becomes a symbol of betrayal and invasion through the neighbor. And the walls, which should separate two businesses, instead become agents of intrusion through which Harris interferes with the privacy of the protagonist. Then there's also a tragicomical perspective in the story, as Kafka's humor often walks a fine line between comedy and tragedy, creating a tragicomical effect. The narrator's plight is simultaneously laughable and also deeply relatable to quite a few people, I guess, because the story taps into universal fears of competition, betrayal, a lack of privacy in a professional setting, situations people who are also working in office might know, suspecting that a colleague wants to undercut them, that someone will steal information and use them for their own good. The way that the narrator also describes his own helplessness is relatable in that regard. His shaky voice, his inability to stop secrets from leaking, the way he tiptoes around his own office. All of this elicits sympathy in a way as well. Also because you see this growing tension throughout the story and throughout the way he describes his experiences with the neighbor. And this final image that the narrator draws of Harris rushing out into the city and delivering information or undercutting the narrator in whatever ways is like the highlight of this tragic tone, because it highlights the futility of the narrator's struggle against forces he cannot control eventually. This is also a very typical situation in Kafka's texts. And also these themes of competition and insecurity overall are something that is both relatable and also ridiculous at times, because there's nothing to fear in reality. He would just have to try to talk to Haras, or even just maybe call him, but instead he's sitting there inside his own office with these thin walls, shivering, being afraid of his neighbor whom he doesn't even really know, and spinning all these ideas in his head. And he's also having these fears of being outperformed and undermined by a rival or a potential rival. And the irony lies here in this situation that it is all just happening inside his head, but it's still so real for him that as a reader you really get drawn into that, and you also feel fear and pity for him in a way. So Kafka uses this irony and the humor to explore the deeper anxieties that are so well known in society, I think. So in this story you see that Kafka very well depicts this story and blends absurdity, irony, and this deadpan kind of delivery of the humor, and creates this tragicomical portrait of the paranoia and professional insecurities of the narrator, whom we even don't know by name. So there's also a part of that. We don't know who the narrator is, but we know about the name of the neighbor, who the narrator does not know anything else about. And all of this humor in that story is rather dark, I think, and also quite subtle, because it is not so straightforward. It is not, you gotta laugh now. So it's just really a little bit more subtle, and still this dry delivery kind of way is making it hard to swallow at times. Also because I think that many people might even find parts of themselves in the characters that Kafka describes. But let us also now look at the second story to get another impression of Kafka's writing. The second story I want to read about is Die Sorge des Hausvaters, or The Cares of a Family Man. It was written between 1914 and 1917, and it was published during his lifetime in 1919, and the collection of Ein Landarzt, kleine Erzählung, a country doctor, a collection of short stories that Kafka published through Kurt Wolf in Munich and Leipzig. And I have translated it as well, and will read the English version to you. So it goes like this. Some say that the word Odradek comes from Slavic origins, and they attempt to demonstrate its formation on that basis. Others believe it originates from German, with Slavic merely having influenced it. However, the uncertainty of both interpretations probably rightly suggests that neither is correct, especially since neither of them can ascribe any meaning to the word. Of course, no one would concern themselves with such studies if there were not truly a being called Odradek. At first glance, it looks like a flat, star-shaped spool of thread, and indeed it seems to be wrapped with thread. However, these are only old torn pieces of thread, knotted together and tangled up, of the most varied kinds and colors. But it is not just a spool. From the middle of the star emerges a small crossbar, and attached at a right angle to this bar is another one. With the help of this second bar on one side and one of the star's protrusions on the other, the whole contraption can stand upright, as if on two legs. One might be tempted to believe that this construct once had some useful form and has now merely broken. But this does not appear to be the case. At least there is no sign of it. Nowhere are there any indications of fractures that would suggest something of the sort. The whole thing appears senseless but complete in its own way. Nothing more can really be said about it, since Odradek is extraordinarily mobile and impossible to catch. He alternates between staying in the attic and stairwell, the hallways and the corridors. Sometimes he isn't seen for months, presumably he has moved to other houses. Yet, inevitably, he returns to our house. Occasionally, when one steps out the door and finds him leaning against the stair railing, one feels the urge to speak to him. Naturally, one does not ask him difficult questions, but treats him, as his small size encourages one to do, like a child. "What is your name?" one asks him. "Odradek," he says. "And where do you live?" "No fixed residence," he says and laughs. But it is only a laugh that can be produced without lungs. It sounds somewhat like the rustling of fallen leaves. At that point, the conversation usually ends. In any case, even these answers are not always forthcoming. Often he remains silent for long periods, like the wood he appears to be. I ask myself in vain what will happen to him. Can he die? Everything that dies has had some sort of goal, some sort of activity, which it has worn itself out pursuing. That does not apply to Odradek. Will he therefore continue to exist, rolling down the stairs before the feet of my children and grandchildren, dragging his thread behind him? It does not harm to anyone, but the thought that he might outlive me is almost painful to me. So this was the story about Odradek, the cares of a family man. It is quintessentially Kafkaesque, as it is dark, absurd, and deeply ironic. Kafka transforms an uncanny and inexplicable object into something both comical and existentially disturbing. So here's how the humor in the story operates. First, you have the absurdity of Odradek's existence. He is described in absurdly precise detail, like a star-shaped spool of thread with little crossbars, making him both mechanical and oddly alive. And it is humorous because it defies categorization. Is Odradek now an object or a creature, something in between, as he can talk and he can move, but he still does not have any living material in him? And the narrative's serious tone and close observation of something so trivial heighten once again the absurdity of this story. Then you also have this childlike dialogue and the rustling laugh. When Odradek speaks, his responses are both enigmatic and childlike, as he answers to "Where do you live?" "No fixed residence." And the exchange between the family man and Odradek is laughable and unsettling at the same time, because you cannot quite understand what this object Odradek really is, and it seems like talking to a child in a way, who gives just very short answers. And the laugh that he emits is described like the rustling of fallen leaves, which is also a little bit eerie and a little bit comical. And the humor here lies also in the fact that the family man seems to be a little bit afraid of Odradek, although it's at the same time just this very small creature or object, and he does not really have anything to fear. Then you also have this irony of the comedy of meaninglessness, as Odradek is described as a kind of senseless but complete object being in its own way. As this is an ironic observation because the purposelessness mirrors a broader existential joke. As humans usually search for meaning, and Odradek simply is and wanders around, pops up unexpectedly and outlasts generations. He's sometimes gone for months, then he's back again, and he does not really seem to have a clear purpose. And this is somehow really funny, especially considering that the family man, the narrator of the story, is so upset about this thought that Odradek might outlive him, although Odradek does not even really live. And this is also absurd in a way, because why would he be jealous of such a thing, a being that does not even have a purpose and a place to go, a place to be, while he himself can create a life with purpose and live it to the fullest. But just this thought that this being might outlive him is what disturbs him. So that's also ironic in a way. And also the serious tone that once again the narrator presents the whole situation as is part of this humorous depiction of Kafka, as he amplifies the humor by presenting the story in an excessively formal tone. The narrator somehow treats Odradek in a way that even is worthy of serious philosophical inquiry, really thinking about what is this object, what does it mean, what is it for, and the contrast between this very trivial subject and the narrator's grave tone is inherently comical, I think. So in this whole story, you see that this story is a perfect example of Kafka's dark and absurdist humor. The story is funny because it treats the inexplicable, the sentient wandering spool of thread with complete seriousness, and exposes the ridiculousness of human attempts to impose meaning on meaningless things, as the humor lies in the contrast between the trivial and the profound, and Kafka's skillful use of irony makes the absurdity both comic and haunting. It leaves readers laughing uneasily, recognizing the futility of their own search for answers in a chaotic world sometimes. And I think that's also something that appears in many of Kafka's stories, that you see that the absurdity of life all over is appearing in his writing, and you see that there's so many things actually really absurd in life if you really think about it, and this is what he just picks up on in his writing and depicts it in a humorous way. So that's what I think he does really, really good, and I hope you could see from these two examples the way that he depicts that. Of course, there's lots more examples also in the longer texts, especially texts like the Metamorphoses, the Verwandlung in German, is really funny, as Kafka describes how Gregor Samsa, the protagonist, is turned into a bug. And for example, the scene in which is described that he just wants to get up and open the door, but he cannot because he's lying on his back and he cannot really properly move. He cannot even get the blanket off him to get out of the bed, to open the door, to do anything that he usually would do. And the way it is described in such precise detail is what makes it so funny, because you can really depict the scene in your head so well. And this way the family deals with the situation of Gregor having turned into a bug is just, oh, that's the reality now, so we got to deal with it. It's like something new, just like, oh, he's got a cold now, what shall we do? And it's like it even becomes like part of this mundane everyday life somehow, as they pay attention, but it's still like not the biggest deal for them, although he's really turned into a bug. And there's also this tragic comical element in that, as you see that his family does not really seem to care, at least his parents do not really seem to care as much about him. There's bigger problems. What will the neighbors think? What will the other people think? And not so much, how can we help our son here, who's turned into a bug and is not a human anymore? So I don't want to go into too much detail, but there's lots of more stories. Also, of course, in the trial, you have this whole absolutely absurd court situation, the endless bureaucracy. You have so many stories in which these details are so funny, and if you really look at it closely and just see this absurd way things are, it makes reading Kafka so much more worthwhile, in my opinion. So to conclude things, I think you can see that Kafka can in fact be funny and humorous, and there's humor that is hidden in the way he usually just writes. It is subtle, it is dry, and it is very ironic, and it reveals the absurdity of human existence while never losing its edge. Stories like The Neighbour and The Cares of a Family Man shows that Kafka's genius lies in his ability to make us laugh and think, often at the same time. And things are not only funny or only dark and miserable. They are oftentimes both. Taking this Kafka year, this time, the end of the year, to reflect on his writing, to pick up one or two of his stories and to think about what he wants to tell us. It reminds us that even amidst life's darkest moments, there is room for humor, no matter how unsettling it might be. I hope you can see that for yourself. So, if you stayed till the end of this video, thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this exploration of the hidden humor in Kafka's writing, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to my channel and tell others about it. And I would love to tell me in the comments what is your favorite text by Kafka, your favorite story, your favorite novel. Why do you think it's special? Why do you think about it still? And what else would you like to explore or to stress, and is something there that I might have even overlooked, or that you want to draw the attention of other readers to? I would love to read about that in the comments. And if you want me to make a special video on a special text by Kafka or a special analysis, just let me know and I will gladly do so in 2025, when the Kafka year is sadly over, but we can look forward to a lot of new wonderful reading material. So I hope you have a good start to 2025 and you enjoyed this video. See you in my next one in the next year. Bye bye!